She once believed you would never change. That no matter how far she walked away, how long she stayed silent, or how wide the distance grew, you'd still be there waiting, hoping, vulnerable. To her, you were the familiar place, the man forever bound to his feelings for her. But what she didn't expect was this: you changed. You didn't stand still in the old story. You kept writing new chapters without her. Your silence wasn't a wound, it was awakening. You didn't change for revenge. You changed because pain demanded you to grow. Now, as she tries to return, she finds herself face to face with your calm. The old tactics don't work anymore. The scripts you relied on are outdated. You're no longer who you were. Not because you want to hurt her, but because you've learned how to heal yourself. And that growth, that silence, is the clearest answer you've ever given. There was a time you lived off her validation. A glance, a message, a hug all gave you worth. When she pulled away, you staggered. When she went silent, you felt invisible. But now, it's different. You don't need others to feel whole. You found yourself not in her eyes, but in the quiet of your own autonomy. You no longer rely on whether someone replies or ignores. You don't need to be chosen to know you matter. She assumed you'd react the same: impatient, emotional, easy to sway. But you don't react anymore. You reserve your energy for what deserves it. No resentment, no explaining, no proving. This isn't coldness, this is inner sufficiency. Strength isn't about what you get, it's about knowing what you no longer lack. When a man is no longer emotionally hungry, he cannot be manipulated. That's when she finally sees you no longer need her. Not out of bitterness, but because you've learned to love yourself. She can still text, still scroll through old photos, still believe that the right timing and a few familiar words will bring you back. But what she doesn't realize is this: you're no longer that easy to reach. There was a time silence tortured you. Sleepless nights trying to decode one vague message, a cold look, a disappearance without explanation. You thought, if only she clarified, if only you understood, the pain would fade. But then you learned, closure isn't something given, it's something chosen. And you chose to stop, no longer needing answers. No longer craving an apology, no longer chasing conclusions for a story that ended in actions, not words. Silence once hurt you, now it's where you find peace. You didn't need her return to heal, you did that on your own. And the moment you stopped seeking, you regained the one thing that mattered: emotional sovereignty. She can still text you, she can still scroll through old photos. She may still believe that timing and a few familiar lines are enough to pull you back. What she doesn't see is you're no longer easy to reach. There was a time you wrestled with silence. You lost sleep trying to decode a vague message, a distant tone, a disappearance with no explanation. You used to believe that if she just told you why, the pain might ease. But you've since learned that closure isn't something given, it's something chosen. And you chose to stop. You no longer seek answers. You don't crave an apology. You're not chasing an ending to something that had already ended through action, even if not through words. What once hurt you, the silence is now where you find peace. You no longer need her to return to feel whole. You healed yourself, and in the moment you stopped searching, you reclaimed the one thing that matters most: your emotional sovereignty. Now she's the one unsettled, the one wondering why you no longer respond. Not because you're trying to hurt her, but because you need nothing from her anymore. Closure didn't come from her, it came from you. The moment you stopped asking why, and started living as if that question no longer mattered. You didn't block her, you didn't make an announcement. You didn't post bitter words. You simply walked away from the old space and stepped into a higher place where she can no longer find you. She still has your number, still knows your social accounts. She could reach out anytime. But what she no longer has access to is your presence. Your heart, your attention, your time, your energy. The things she once took for granted are now kept for what truly deserves them. You didn't build a wall. You didn't slam the door. You just stopped living in the house she used to wander in and out of as she pleased. She didn't lose you because you pushed her away. She lost you because she stayed still while you kept moving forward, not out of pride, not to win, but because you refused to keep existing in a space where you were treated as less. You didn't need to cut her off, you just kept growing. And when growth happens, those who stay the same get left behind. It's not disconnection, it's distance born from movement. You've simply moved beyond the reach of the past. You're not just busy, you've closed the most important door, the emotional one. The man she once manipulated with a glance, a pause, a vague sentence, no longer exists. No more reactions, no more waiting, no more needing anything from her. She thinks your silence is just a mask, but it's a boundary, a distance you've chosen to protect your peace. You no longer play by old rules, you no longer live on impulse. Now, every move is a choice. You don't perform strength. You don't ignore to prove a point. You simply refuse to be pulled into what no longer fits. Your steadiness isn't about evasion, it's the result of having moved past the need to engage. She can still call, but she can't touch the man she once knew. Because he's gone, moved far beyond what used to hold him back. She says you've changed, that you've grown cold, distant, numb. But the truth is you're not cold, you're clear. You haven't shut off your emotions, you've learned to command them. You used to react on impulse, one cold message, one distant look, and you were in panic. You'd reply instantly, explain everything, do anything to keep the connection alive. And that made you easy to manipulate, but not anymore. Now, you've learned to pause before reacting. You choose to observe instead of defend. You've learned the strength of silence over the need to prove. And that unsettles her, because you're no longer predictable, no longer steerable, no longer breakable. Your silence isn't a wall, it's a filter, a quiet shield for your peace. You don't use emotion as a weapon, you live by principle, not reaction. You don't need to be understood by everyone, you only need to remain grounded. And when others can no longer shake your mind, they call you cold, but you know the truth, you're not cold. You're just not easily moved anymore. You used to live in loops, the same stories, the same emotions, the same patterns, hoping, somehow, for a different ending. Stuck between memory and hope. Not moving forward, not letting go. But one day, you stopped. Not because you didn't care anymore, but because you realized repetition doesn't bring change. So you chose another path, one aimed at the future. At the legacy you'll leave behind. At the man you're becoming. You no longer sit waiting to be understood. You no longer need someone to see your pain. Your focus has shifted to purpose, to discipline, to building something far greater than passing emotion. She's still there, replaying the same questions, the same scripts. But you've left that stage. You're not acting in the old play anymore. You're writing a new chapter, one with no rewinds, no replays. That's the difference between living from emotion and living from intention. When you stop looping, you start moving forward, towards something that actually matters, not the past, but the mark you leave long after you're gone. It used to take just one late reply, one cold look, and your mood would spiral. You lived in emotional dependency, your balance tied to how she treated you that day. But that wasn't love. That was control, masked as connection. It came from the void within, until one day, you chose something else. You chose yourself. No grand declarations, no anger. The change came quietly when you stopped reacting. When you stopped explaining, when you stopped chasing validation. And from that moment, her influence began to fade. Not because she changed, but because you did first. You no longer live to be chosen, you live as if you already are. And you are. Her voice, once enough to confuse you, no longer holds weight. Her gaze, once enough to shake you, now passes through. Because you built stability from within, not borrowed it from someone else's attention. And when a man stops waiting for someone else to confirm his worth, he becomes untouchable. She tried to find you again, but the man standing before her was unrecognizable. No more long messages. No more explanations after her silence. No more desperate attempts to fix things. Everything now felt unfamiliar, and that's exactly what you intended. You didn't change to prove a point. You changed to live rightly, not to make her regret, but because you couldn't go back to being the man who waited, who endured, who lost himself for someone who never truly saw him. She hoped for a reaction. You offered calm. She looked for an old weakness. You gave her stillness. She tried old tricks. You no longer responded. And that's not avoidance, that's freedom. She doesn't recognize you anymore, because you no longer live through someone else's eyes. You don't need to be understood. You don't need forgiveness. You live like a man who has walked out of the shadows needing no one's approval to know his own worth. She's reaching back for the past. But you're living in a version of yourself she never imagined, one she never helped build, and can no longer reach.